Pete, Bob Dylan once famously sang, "These times, they are a changin'. They sure are in autonomy. Does Detroit even have a future in autonomy?"
No, I think very clearly the best hope Detroit might have in the future would be if Stellantis, if you consider that Detroit, were to somehow start reselling Pacifica minivans to Waymo as a new platform. But I'd take a better chance of that than of GM really getting to personally owned autonomous vehicles anytime in the foreseeable future.
When they shut down Cruise last Wednesday, blindsided employees. They're bitter. They're angry. You speak to engineering talent, they're not staying. So if they can't keep the engineering talent, how are they going to build a personally owned autonomous vehicle? Super Cruise doesn't work very well. I was in there. They were very kind. Full disclosure, GM gave me a press car last week, and I took it on the freeway on 95, headed down towards Miami. It won't work in the exit ramp, off ramp. It won't work in the lane closest to the exit off ramp. We get into the second lane over. I engaged Super Cruise a few times, got fumbled, got it to work. Set the limit to 75, vehicle speeds up, and then all of a sudden decides to do a lane turn to go one lane over. Lady's coming in hot and heavy behind me. It drops to 45 miles an hour, and the lady almost rear-ended me. And then it speeds back up to 75. Yesterday, I take out my Tesla 12.5.6. I drove 1 hour, no intervention, no problem. They can't even figure out Super Cruise, and yet they think they're going to build a personally autonomous vehicle with no engineering talent. How's this going to happen?
I'm going to take a slightly different tack than you. I think Super Cruise is very good. At least it has been in my experience multiple times over the years. I think it's the best driver assist system, and it has a good HMI for handoffs. I've not had an experience like yours, but I'll take that under consideration. But still, even with that said and that vantage point, I don't understand why they need both Super Cruise and Cruise to go forward. And I wonder and worry if they're going to screw up the good thing that I think they have in Super Cruise by trying to integrate Cruise in some way, whether that's the system itself and the software or the teams as well. I don't see necessarily why Super Cruise needs that. And I think that's in a way the worst possible scenario, because Super Cruise is built around a human driver. Cruise's technology is built around no human driver. These are very different philosophical things. So if you want to pursue personally owned autonomy, stick to Cruise, the remaining Cruise team in a corner somewhere. Don't integrate them with Super Cruise.
I will give credit where credit's due. The HMI and the Super Cruise was well done. There's no doubt about that. You're right. You're taking two forms of technology. One, to operate level 4, driver out, no human in the loop. And you're taking an L2 system for human in the loop. The stacks are incompatible. Then let's throw another ingredient here. There's an analyst at a very large bank from Switzerland. We were speaking over the weekend, and he is predicting, not publicly, but me privately, so that's why I'm going to omit his name here, that GM's going to dump all this and go to Mobileye. That's what this very prominent Wall Street auto analyst is telling me.
Well, I mean, it is interesting because we are in the age of licensing now. We see Mobileye, Neuro, Wave, a bunch of others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head here, but I think that everybody's starting to look to license, and maybe GM makes sense in that respect as a potential recipient. I often wonder, like, well, everybody's developing this stuff to license it to somebody else. Who's on the receiving end? And, that sounds plausible to me, but we'll see how long GM sticks with their in-house development of personally owned autonomous vehicles.
The in-house development's not going to work because they can't get the engineering talent. So you're GM. You rebooted this thing after you got rid of all the first individuals in the first round, along with Kyle Vogt, who was gone, who is now calling GM dummies. And that's a quote. That's what he said. It's in a tweet. It's public record. You invest $850 million. So you're over the numbers, anywhere the estimates are anywhere between 9.2 to 9.5 billion. We haven't got an exact number yet of what GM invested in Cruise. Why not spin it out as an independent entity and try and make it a licensing thing and seize control to something to try and salvage some of the, for all practical purposes, the $10 billion that you flush down the tube. And let's be honest, I was watching The Simpsons the other day. Homer Simpson worked for a self-driving car company in one of the episodes, and he did a better job managing it than GM did. And Homer just knows how to hit a button and eat donuts and go to Moe's and drink Duff beer.
I think if we're going to look back at this a few years from now in some way and not be in this moment, The real opportunity GM missed was probably what they were talking about doing or floating the idea of in some way 3 years ago of spinning Cruise out as its own company and going through the IPO process. And that would have been the time to cash in. And now I don't, if you're another company right now, just with the optics, do you want to license Cruise technology?
No. So 100% no. So let's go back to that. I know we're playing Monday morning quarterback here. Don Ammann was right.
Yeah, if I could get a truth serum moment with somebody, I think it would be with him and find out what really were the details of what was going on between him, Kyle Vogt, Mary Barra. Was that December of 21 that he left? I think he became CEO when Kyle's first term as CEO ended at circa 19. And Dan was brought in to kind of be the corporate guy, GM, like, through and through at that point. And so what happened in 2 years that went so bad? Like that's probably to me the beginning of the end of Cruise. Is, my sense from talking to some people was that he was trying to put the brakes on them starting public service quickly, and he lost that battle. He's out. They started in summer of 22, and we saw how that went. He was, if that's the case, and that's a bit of secondhand information, but if that lines up, he was clearly right that they weren't ready and they got out ahead of their skis.
I'll give you 2 pieces of firsthand knowledge. First piece, I wasn't in the room. Second piece, I was in the room. First piece of inside knowledge, Dan wanted to be CEO of a publicly traded company. That's why he was pushing for the spin out. Phase 2, I was in the room. Cruise was moving their headquarters to Miami in West Palm. It was leaving San Francisco. That's what Dan wanted to do. During COVID, Dan was living in Wellington. Headquarters looked like executives were going to West Palm, to a related building. Mr. Ross, you had the right deal, sir. And then massive operations in Miami. If that happened, you would have never had the incident in San Francisco. And once again, Dan would have been right.
Question for you. If the incident in San Francisco, and by incident, I mean the pedestrian-involved crash on October 2nd, 2023, that didn't happen, is Cruise in this, I don't want to say predicament, but it's not a predicament. Does Cruise reach the end as we now know it?
It's a good question. Potentially yes, potentially no. The real reason why Cruise killed it, again, firsthand knowledge, GM shopped Cruise for outside investment. I happen to spend a lot of time in New York, and I can tell you that the banks weren't biting, and there was no interest from any of the large banks, no interest from PE, no interest from sovereign wealth. I won't name the sovereign wealth, but I will tell you that one sovereign wealth turned down an investment in Cruise. GM had no path forward. They couldn't get any outside funding. That's what killed it. If the incident didn't happen, would it have been the end? No, possibly no. I do think at some point, though, as with Mr. Gil West, who did a phenomenal job, now he's CEO of Hertz, as COO of Cruise, they would have pushed for a spin out, because I don't see a path forward, knowing everything that we've known now, that Cruise would have ever thrived inside of GM. I don't see it. I don't think it would be the end, but at some point we would have a Dan 2.0 moment where it would reach a crossroads.
It's an interesting what if, I feel like everything winds up folded into GM at some point regardless. So I don't necessarily feel like the incident was the moment that changed everything, but it may have hastened it. My other question is, why kind of go through the kabuki dance, Grayson, of this reboot over the past year since the incident? That's, where they invested another $825 million just to here we are 11 months later. They're like, nah, I think actually we're not going to do that. That's the real wasted opportunity. And I think, I would guess, for the people who remained at Cruise, like the real flashpoint of frustration and anger is why string people along? Why bring new people in just to give up, to totally give up 11 months later?
Good money after bad. I could say some very stern, harsh things, but out of respect for parties involved, I won't. I will say that the employees are misled, that they were not told the truth. They are hurt today because they knew what was coming. Pete, we're recording on Monday, December 16th. Do you know why today is a significant day?
I want to say that we're almost 3 years to the day since the Dan Ammann departure that we referenced just a few minutes ago, but maybe I'm off on that.
I don't remember that exact day, but it was during Christmas time that meeting took place. Today, December 16th, 2024, is the day that Cruise 2.0 was to reboot and go drive her out in Houston. Drive her out in Houston was supposed to be today. GM got to the 1 yard line and fumbled. They panicked. They got scared. They never wanted it to work. And I heard things through the grapevine. This is unverified. Rumblings through the grapevine that GM was trying to slow walk the revamp of Cruise, and then a culture clash was brewing again, where the Cruise had the safety sign off by Mr. Kenner. And in my opinion, Mr. Steve Kenner is one of the smartest minds in autonomy when it comes to safety. The gentleman is an absolute genius. Not to mention, he is a class act, a wonderful gentleman. And for those that know Steve personally, he is one heck of a tennis player. He's a very smart gentleman. The sign-offs were in place. Mr. Kenner had it all built out. Mr. Rob Grant had the entire government thing built out. Mo had the tech set built out. It was all ready to go. GM panicked. And here's the thing, Pete. Why panic when you have several analysts on the street assigning $1 trillion valuation to FSD alone? Aurora stock since April has 3x, 300% return. The market is bullish for autonomy. And yet you do this? I don't understand it. And this is an Alex Roy thing, goes to narrative command, in which we agree on. GM lost complete control of the narrative. But why do this when they still could have rebooted Cruise and turned it into a successful business? I'm not saying profitable. I'm saying successful.
I'm very interested. So I'll say, like, up front, so your listeners know, I don't know of specifically the plans to start today that you just mentioned. But along similar lines, perhaps, the idea that I think Waymo has now shown the path to revenue and successful commercialization and meaningful scale with relatively few taxis on the road, and that number being about 650. You have the example, you have the federal landscape about to turn from headwind to tailwind. So it does strike me as a very curious time to give up on something. Like, if you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar, and you're seemingly, like you just said, you have the pieces in place from a safety, regulatory, and technical aspect. It seems like a very curious time to walk everything back.
It's odd. So you're right. There's a massive tailwind behind autonomy. And on the other side, electrification, there's a massive headwind. The Trump transition team wants to cut off all funding support, government support for electrification, including vehicle sales and charging. And you bet on this. Do you not have a government relations team that gets paid a lot of money to inform you and tell you these things? They made a classic error, or if you want to use the term, a child's term, a boo-boo. It just doesn't seem right that just to salvage something out. I just can't put the pieces together outside of fear. And if you listen to that analyst call, this is on the public record. Ms. Barr's voice was cracking. Joe Spack from UBS asked her a question. She couldn't answer it. Analyst from Morgan Stanley asked a question. She couldn't answer it. Goldman, she couldn't answer it. It wasn't rehearsed. This was kind of a flying at the seat of our pants. We're just ripping the cord off and we're going to see where it lands moment.
I feel like, since election day, we've known that these changes to federal electrification policy and strategy are coming. So it's not a surprise. I feel for automakers who, they've been trying to tack a course between very diametrically opposed federal administrations. I feel like the real hard part, and why I still think these investments are probably necessary, at least they're necessary if you're trying to be a global company, because you have China, you have Europe going down the electrification path, regardless of what happens here in the next 4 years. I think if you're trying to look 25 years out, you have to have a multi-powertrain strategy in some way. So I can sympathize a bit with, trying to navigate these very dramatic short-term changes. I think the real question, though, is along those lines: does GM want to be a multinational company that's playing as a global leader, or are they going to sell pickup trucks in Texas and the Midwest of the United States, and that's the direction they go?
But if you want to be a multi-power transmission company, where's your autonomy strategy? You look at pickup trucks. The Cybertruck's selling extremely well. Yes, it's a polarizing truck. People like it. It's got FSD on it. FSD 13 started shipping out late Sunday night for the Cybertruck. Why are you going to buy a truck with no ADAS, no autonomy, no weird user interface? It doesn't make sense. You get into a Tesla, it knows what your music, what you're listening to. It knows the temperature, it knows how you like your seats. You get into a GM car, you have to set everything and start all over. You have to connect it and go through a very convoluted user interface system. I having dinner with my father-in-law, and he's out there shopping for a new car. So he comes over for Sunday dinner, and we're sitting there talking about it and telling him we own a Tesla. And he went to test drive a vehicle, which I can't say for legal reasons the name of the vehicle. He went to test drive, and he goes, the engine went, ta-da, 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 ta-da. He goes, and he walked out. And then he's complaining about trying to sync his phone thing. Well, it says, if you buy a Tesla, it just all does it for you automatically. Really? They don't tell you this. So there you go. I got an 83-year-old looking at a Tesla because his phone can sync to it. So when my mother-in-law calls him and asks him to pick something up at Costco, he's not fumbling in the car trying to pick it up. The UI becomes a huge selling point in Detroit. Not only they're behind on autonomy, they're behind on the UI, UX.
Yes, they're behind Tesla on that. And I'll tell you a similar story. I took my mom car shopping a month or two ago, and she's 75. What does she want? She wants Apple CarPlay because one of her friends showed it to her, and it's so nice and easy to use. And like that ruled out a GM vehicle or a GM electric vehicle right now. So they're behind. They're just back to the question that you started the show on with, like, how is Detroit going to compete? It's not just autonomy. It's everything. And and it's not just Detroit. It's Nissan, it's Volkswagen, it's being a legacy automaker with legacy costs.
Legacy cost or scrounging, but it's also the legacy mentality. How do they get rid of that legacy mentality to look for this tech forward consumer? You have your mother in her 70s, I have my father-in-law in his 80s, and they both want tech. They don't care about the transmission. They don't care if it's automatic or manual. They care about the tech. That's what's driving the purchasing decisions this year. And if you look at today, UBS this morning downgraded the Porsche stock. Porsches aren't even selling. I know they're incredible cars. They're not selling. Consumers want tech. The Teslas are selling because the tech.
I think the auto industry, I mean, to be fair, like, I think there's certain challenges for Tesla. There's certain challenges for pure EV plays like Rivian and Lucid. Like, I don't think anyone in the auto industry has it easy right now. But to this point that if you're a legacy automaker and you're behind on centralizing your electronic architecture, they're just behind on a lot of things. And I really worry about what the future looks like here in Southeast Michigan and other places throughout the industrial Midwest with all these ripple effects for the supply chain as well.
I'm going to say something controversial, and this was with all due respect.
No, not you, Grayson.
Oh, gosh. Yes, me, Pete. Does Detroit become Foxconn City?
I mean, we have tariffs in place to prevent that in some way, right? To give legacy automakers time to catch up. But I think that's certainly a plausible scenario that Detroit is providing the vehicle supplier for the tech. The value in the car is now the software and the technology, not in the powertrain. And I think if you go back to, was it 2015 that Sergio Marchionne was talking about how automakers needed to partner more on engine development because that wasn't a differentiator anymore. And here we are on the cusp of 2025, and there's some automakers who still not learned that lesson. I think he was spot on, and people are paying a price.
The value is in software. Mark Andreessen famously in the Wall Street Journal penned software is eating the world. Now you could say large language models are eating the world. The value is in the software. But yet GM says, no, we don't want Apple CarPlay. We're going to build our own. It's better. You don't control the phone. You don't have one. You don't make one of these. I don't understand the rationale behind that.
And it's interesting. Like, think that, zoom out on that a bit. Like, my kids want this. Like, this is their personal mobility device that connects them to the world. It is not necessarily the actual vehicle that they can drive around in. Like, that's the mindset shift.
Yes. This connects Uber. This connects Lyft. This is how you buy your airplane tickets. This is your whole life. This is your key if you have a Tesla. But yet, why can't they adapt? Why, when I get into a legacy OEM, do I have to hit a button? Do I have to have a key? Why can't this just be my key? I can have a license in certain states on this now, but yet every manufacturer should make this the default key.
That's interesting. Yes, I can't disagree with you in any way. I think it's just like in some ways, it's a stubborn refusal to adapt to the world as it now is. Like, is that, I mean, how do you get to this point where Tesla has been doing what they're doing so well for more than a decade and not be like, at least like introducing the model like now that would ostensibly catch up? Like, I don't know how you could be that far behind.
You have to ask the question, is Detroit afraid of change? You and I know the answer, yes.
Yes. And I think that they're going to have to. It's like looking at the changes with Volkswagen right now in Europe that are so painful and dramatic. I don't think Detroit is that far behind that scenario. Like, we've already seen some layoffs. Curiously, we saw GM, lay off 1,000 people from its software engineering division within the last few months, which is interesting because I was talking to let's say, prominent Silicon Valley executive who I asked him about that and asked if that meant they were retreating on software. And he said it could, but not necessarily. Like, you really don't need that many people. You probably need like 250 really good people, maybe 200. And, so if that's the case, I don't want to use that as the proxy for a company retreating from software, because I thought that was really interesting. But we need to see a strategy. We need to see product in the car very soon. I would argue that you need to see Apple CarPlay in the car very soon, but that's my 2 cents as well.
You're right. The executive you spoke to is right. The AI writes the code now. 20% of Google's code last quarter is written by AI. This whole company wrote Autonomy. We run this whole business with AI tools. Any major publicly traded company will tell you they run their whole business on AI tools. You don't need as much labor cost, which is turned into a huge union fight over that. What else we need to see in the car? We need to see large language models integrated in the car from a voice perspective. We need really great voice assistants built into the car. Detroit could innovate there, but I don't see where consumers says, oh, I want to buy a GM car, I want to buy a Ford car because of the large language voice model. That's not what it is. Do they try and get ahead of the Foxconning of Detroit and build a no badge vehicle and start licensing it out or building it to these AV companies then can build on top of it? It's because at some point something's going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. You have the rise of China. Pony AI, in an interview, the Financial Times today came out and said publicly next year they're going from 250 robotaxis in China to over 1,000. The key point to that to Detroit, and Mr. Farley talks a lot about this, price, $41,000 a vehicle. The cost of robotaxi to come out, Baidu saying that they're going to do a sub $30,000 AV. How are they going to compete? If China's building sub $40,000, sub $30,000 AVs, and Tesla's going to come out with a Cybercab, I'm going to say with a question mark at sub 30,000, how do you compete? And the interesting thing on the Cybercab is, this was a Barron's report, 50% less parts than the Model 3. That's easy to maintain and built for profitability.
That's really interesting. And it kind of, to bring this all full circle, like, I don't know what the cost on the Cruise Origin was going to be, but that was optimized for a competitive price point. And, GM walked away from building the Origin maybe about this time last year. I at least said that they were going to delay it for, into 2026 at the time. But, maybe you can dust off those blueprints at some point. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see we're hearing the immediate demise of Cruise as we know it, period. It's too hard to look beyond and say, could they ever reboot this if they wanted to get it off the ground? And I think from a vehicle perspective, they probably have the Origin that they could put plans into place for. But just from building the engineering teams, building the workforce again to do it, I think that they've burned too many bridges.
Yeah, they're torched. Gasoline. No, they're not going to be able to hire the engineering talent ever again to make up for the way that this was completely mishandled. I'll give you another statement. GM, in my opinion, needs to bring in a crisis management team because they created a crisis in the autonomous vehicle industry where they want to build a personally owned AV. They're not going to be able to get the talent. They need a crisis management team how to figure this out. And they also have to figure out to message this to Wall Street, because Wall Street is cheering and roaring autonomy, yet you're cutting this business. So you have one half says, oh, great, GM could do more buybacks. Buybacks don't create innovation. Engineers create innovation. There's a big disconnect between where you're saying you're going to go and where you're acting and you're going.
Well, this is interesting, Grayson, because let's give GM some credit. In some way, their stock price has done very well this year, right? Like, if your primary goal is to drive up the stock price, and I don't have the exact numbers today as of December 16th at 11 a.m. in front of me, but they've done that. They've succeeded in that. But the paradox is that they have, they're not innovating. And it makes me really think of Boeing in a lot of ways too, where they got to this point where all that mattered was the stock price, and you take the value out of your product and value out of your innovation teams to do it. The situations are a little different, but I think there's some parallels there for sure. And You want to look to where GM might wind up when you don't innovate for long enough. That might be the lesson. Please learn the lesson before you get into that predicament. But they're clearly heading that direction. And it's not just Cruise. They walked away from the Chevy Volt in December 19, only to now be talking about plugins as they kind of pivot between the administrations here. They walked away from the Larry Burns skateboard. They walked away from the EV1. Like, they have this track record of, I like how you put it earlier, of getting to the 1 yard line on some things and then backtracking. And that's a pattern. I think it's a unique to GM pattern too. There's others throughout the industry who have done similar things, but never do you line them up so often with the same company. Like almost every 5 years, here we are with GM backing away from another ambitious bet.
The EV1, you have the Volt, you have Larry Burns' skateboard architecture. He wrote a whole book on it. They're at the 1 yard line. They fumble. They could have won the Super Bowl. And then you want to know the interesting thing about the EV1? The same year they killed the EV1 was the same year Tesla was founded. Put that into perspective.
Yes, and it's not just that the timeframes line up, Grayson. Chelsea Sexton has been on the Shift podcast, not to pat myself on the back here too long. She literally went from the funeral that they held for the EV1s at the cemetery in Hollywood, flew to the Bay Area after that and met with the Tesla founders like that afternoon. Like there's a direct link between the demise of the EV1 and the rise of Tesla. And boy, like, you want to pump up your stock price. It's tragic in a lot of ways. If you're, GM, and you look at some of the talent that made the EV1 and they went elsewhere in the industry. Bob Gallion, for one, went to cattle. And, you might credit the rise of the China EV to Bob Gallion, who cut his chops on the EV1. It's not just Tesla. It's like they seeded this industry and we're scared to punch it in.
I could sit here and make a very convincing argument. If it wasn't for Bob Gallion, CATL wouldn't be where it is today. That gentleman played a huge instrumental role in where today. He's a very nice gentleman on a personal, but he played a huge instrumental role. Why does GM get to the 1 yard line and fumble every single time? And why does Wall Street not hold them accountable?
Well, I mean, I think the Wall Street is part of the problem in that sense, that they're looking for the short-term, the quarterly profits. They're not looking at the long-term and long-tail consequences for that, and not balancing those two.
Financial engineering only gets you so far. You have to innovate. You have to innovate.
You have to, and that's, back to Boeing. We see the consequences of not innovating. I'm almost at a loss for words because this keeps happening with General Motors. And I don't know, why is that culture? I said before, like, in some ways this plays out at every company, but in some ways this like track record of being so at the forefront and then backing away is pretty unique to GM. So like, what culturally holds them back? I don't know the answer to that. Mike Ramsey from Gartner has kind of posited something interesting, and it's, GM, you have executives who are ultimately afraid of their job, for their jobs. Like, Elon's not afraid of his job at Tesla. He's not afraid to rattle cages, to say, I'm going to take my company private. Maybe looking more at the legacy industry. You have Toyota with Akio Toyota kind of serving in a very prominent, respected role. You have Bill Ford at Ford. So you have these deep family connections. GM has neither the force of personality of Elon or these, families that own a significant share in the stock that can buffet those calls to squeeze out every nickel of profits at the expense of your long-term health. So that's one thing to, think about, I guess. And that comes from Mike Ramsey at Gartner, but they do need to solve this cultural problem.
Is GM IBM? They both have M's. IBM had a cloud hybrid play early on. They squandered that to AWS. They squandered that to Google Cloud Compute. They squandered that to Microsoft Azure. They were ahead of all of them. AWS was early on. I met with the IBM team years and years ago about this. IBM, you want to talk about another squander, they had Watson. Watson was integrated into the cloud services. The only way to access Watson whether you subscribe to their cloud services for the AI. They had an AI recommendation engine. VF Corp's North Face was one of the first companies ever to use that to recommend what you might like based on your past browsing history when you go to northface.com to buy outdoor supplies. Now, lo and behold, where are we today? Large language models recommendations are all that. What do? They IBM, financial engineering, they stopped innovating, they flushed it down the toilet. GM had the electric vehicle and they had the AV. What do? They flushed it down the toilet. Is GM the modern day IBM?
I think that's a very fair comparison. Yes. And I'm sure there's like business school studies and work on this topic, but like, is this just like indicative of any company when you reach a certain size and or certain age that you can't innovate anymore? Like if we look back over American history, does everybody go away at some point?
Does everybody go away at some point? I have to do research on that. You can look at Union Pacific has been going way back to the pre-depression. They're still around. There are companies that are still around that grow and prosper. If you look at Ma Bell and all the baby bells, if they were stayed together, they could have been today's modern day Google. The way that all the technologies and all the patents that came back of it. And that's a good history lesson. Can companies constantly reinvent themselves? One company, you want to talk about one of the greatest fumbles all time in history, is Kodak. I say that having experienced it. My first job ever was working at a camera store. I developed film, and I saw the rise of digital cameras. So I'm working in there, and the Kodak. Oh, this is garbage. This is garbage. They had the patents for first digital camera, and they blew the whole thing. Back to GM though, who becomes their Lou Gerstner? Lou Gerstner famously went into IBM, turned it around, got it back in innovation again before it went off the rails. I believe that book, he wrote a book on it, was like, who turned the elephant around? So who goes into GM and becomes their Lou Gerstner, turns it around, slims the company down, and focuses on profitability and innovation?
So you're saying they need their version of Alan Mulally going to Ford?
Or I'll give you an example. This is one of the greatest examples of modern history, and I will say this publicly again and again. Over the last decade, since this gentleman has assumed the CEO role, he has returned and created more shareholder value than anybody that I can recollect. I have to do research on that. Satya Nadella at Microsoft. He has turned that thing around because what did Mr. Nadella do? He made a very wise, smart bet on cloud. And he integrated Microsoft Office products into a service. And like Microsoft, don't like Microsoft, it spits off a ton of cash, and Mr. Nadella has done a brilliant job turning that around. And this is, again, public data. When Mr. Steve Ballmer was CEO of Microsoft, the returns were negative. Mr. Nadella came in and turned the company around. He was an internal executive at Microsoft. Does GM have somebody internally that can be their version of Mr. Nadella?
Internally, you think? I mean, with everything we're talking about, like I think that, I mean, it's very possible that should Mary Barra retire, that it would be an internal pick. But with everything that we've said so far, I think like it leads me to a conclusion that it needs to be an external pick.
If you're an external Silicon Valley executive, they have to turn to tech. Why would you want to get up and move to Detroit, a legacy architecture where you're going to have union resistance to do anything? Why would you want to take the risk?
Because it's a great challenge. A challenge to and turn around doesn't seem like the right phrase right now, because as we've said, GM stock price is doing quite well right now. The challenge is to reinvent a global, national, iconic brand. I think someone would want to take up that challenge.
Reinvent the brand and try and figure out some way to build autonomy to hedge the brand for the future. Yes, somebody would want to do it. It would be massively challenging undertaking, and you would need the full authority of the board to do it. But in order to do that, you are going to have to cut costs because you're going to have to keep the stock price going, but then you're going to run into the union issues. Like it or not, that Sean Fain contract with the UAW is going to be an albatross around their neck as they go to innovate, especially if President-elect Trump puts those tariffs on Mexico. Oh boy, and all those parts coming in. Now your cost structure is getting squeezed. You have no money to innovate and to fund autonomy. Do you think that the pending tariffs could have been a reason why Mary Barr made the decision to shut down Cruise? Because they're going to have a large financial impact on GM's business the way it's structured today.
That's a good question. I don't necessarily know if there's a direct link of here's our hit with the tariffs, here's our outgoing expense with Cruise, but I mean, when you look at the total sum picture, that makes some sense. That could be why Cruise got to the point of being days away from driver out, and someone saying, not that we're scared to go driver out, but hey, now we have this ginormous big expense coming, and before we get off the starting line with this thing, we may reevaluate that.
When you look at reevaluating things, when Cruise is officially sunsetted, we'll get an FCC filing that it's officially closed down. I'll be generous, say 1 quarter, 2 quarters, or perhaps 3 quarters later. They have no autonomy business. The FCC filings have been done. Do we see Waymo potentially get cars from GM? Because they're going to need vehicles and they have to diversify. The Zeekr, there was reports on Reddit over the weekend that the Zeekr's out in Austin, unverified photos, so can't verify them, but it's out there testing. You had the very public relationship with the Hyundai, which they're getting in next year. They're going to test in 26 going into service. I predict the first market for those Hyundais will probably be Miami. Waymo's going to need supply of vehicles. Perhaps so they turn to GM to buy vehicles. Then GM, they become Foxconn for autonomy.
What vehicle? Imagine, what if, Grayson, right? What if Waymo licensed the Cruise Origin? You have the Waymo Origin.
It solves the Zeekr problem. It's an American-made vehicle.
It does solve the Zeekr problem.
And it's been tested at the Milford Proving Grounds up by you. And I believe, didn't they tool a factory for the Origin?
Yes. Factory zero.
So you have a factory. You get rid of the China problem because all signs point, reading the tea leaves, President Trump is going to crack down on China.
President Biden already has. Let's remember that he put the 100% tariff on EVs that imperiled the Waymo Zeekr relationship in the first place. So that clearly is going to get more stringent under President-elect Trump.
You're right on that. Thank you for pointing out the clarity. You are correct that President Biden did that. The Waymo Origin, that's got a sexy ring to it. It's got a nice brand to it, and it eliminates any potential hiccups, hurdles, and heartaches that Waymo made with Zeekr. Waymo can come out and say, we understand because of what President Biden implemented with the tariffs and what President Trump is doing. Let's use the term accelerate. And then don't forget, we also have nominee Senator Marco Rubio, who is a China hawk, to be Secretary of State in President Trump's cabinet that he has selected. He's nominated, but they haven't been confirmed. There's a lot of China hawks in there. Mr. Miller of the America First Policy Project is a China hawk. They could say, we understand where the climate is. We want to invest in America. They can go to President Trump and say, Alphabet's going to commit $1 billion to invest in America, or whatever the dollar amount is. The unions would cheer. The president would give them a truth, if that's what you call it. And then that Zeekr problem just becomes a footnote in history. That's brilliant, Pete.
That's what I'm here for, Grayson. I should be an executive making these decisions.
I tell you, it'd be fun if we go run.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No. Oh, come on. It'd be fun if we went and ran an AV company together. We get a band together and go run an AV company.
The Origin. This may be a Zoox-related question as well, but some of those two vehicles were designed with the idea that riders were going to, discrete riders were going to share trips. And that idea, I think, has failed in the United States. And I don't know if the economics work on deploying those vehicles if you have a vast majority of your ridership being single fare rides, people who don't want to share with a random stranger sitting across from them. So that's my one caveat to this brilliant Waymo Origin idea that we've stumbled upon here, and may have been problematic for the Origin to begin with.
But GM has to recoup some of their investment. So you're right on the economic from an operation standpoint. If GM's going to have a fire sale on them.
Waymo's got $5.6 billion from its most recent funding round, and they have a long-term vehicle need. I don't know how if the Ioniq 5 necessarily solves their long-term need.
The Ioniq 5 is, I believe Waymo, when we're seeing, are going to go to a mixed fleet. Perhaps this is a Hyundai Ioniq 5 city, this is an I-Pace city, this is a Waymo Origin city. That could happen, or the city could have multiple different vehicle types in them. You're right, though. I don't want to share a vehicle with a stranger. I'm not going to do it. And if you look at data, look at shared rides from Uber and Lyft, and this is all public data, they failed. They didn't work. Consumers or individuals did not want to share rides, which if Zoox wants you to share a ride, how's that going to work? Do they have to go to a new vehicle architect type, or can they get the cost low enough? But I don't see how they're going to get the cost low enough because they're manufacturing it themselves to make this profitable. Or did Tesla see something when they did the 2-passenger Cybercab with 50% less parts than the Model 3. Vern is also doing a two-passenger. Is two-passenger the future?
It seems like we're trending in that direction between the Cybercab and Vern and Waymo going from, I mean, for perhaps for other reasons, but going from the Zeekr to the Ioniq 5. That's a smaller vehicle. It's not a two-passenger, but well, maybe it is whatever configuration that they come out with. But maybe that gets the, economics per ride into a more favorable position.
Look at the economics per ride. I've said this many times, and I'll say this again. Tesla will crack FSD. Does Waymo have to re-engineer their stack for vision only to get the cost down? Because the whole market's going that way. And at some point, Riley Brandon in his newsletter last night, 26 or 27, he believes there's a Waymo IPO. I don't know any reason why Alphabet at this point would even consider an IPO, but as Mr. Brennan said, so I'll give him credit for that. But at their current cost structure, you can't IPO this thing. Was Elon right all along when he called LiDAR a crutch? Because FSD is working, and it's working really good.
Well, I'm going to say no. I think right now, I mean, Waymo has innovated throughout the years, certainly. So I think that, to say their approach is LiDAR first is, accurate, but also ever changing. I think that, of course, the cameras are intriguing, but I think there's nothing to me, especially since, Cybercab is not deployed yet in the real world, and Waymo has 650 robotaxis in the real world today and growing. I would not, if I was Waymo, make any dramatic technical changes for the foreseeable future. I think the extra cost of the LiDAR, centric approach is worthwhile because that's what's enabling safe operations today at meaningful scale.
Do we have any insight, analyst numbers of what Waymo's honeycomb LiDARs cost? Do we have any insights roughly what they might cost?
I have heard wildly divergent figures on that, so much so that I would hesitate to venture a guess or take an average of them. But it's a good question.
Because what we don't know, if you're running Hesai LiDARs, you're running Ouster LiDARs, we can get publicly available MSRP data. Because Waymo engineered the LiDAR in-house, and this is in theory, this is not factual. In theory, could the cost be much, much lower than just buying an off-the-shelf LiDAR?
Once they get to scale, I think, I don't know if it'd be much lower. It'd be hard pressed to think you're going to go lower because you've engineered it in-house. But certainly you can amortize those costs over more and more vehicles, and it makes more and more sense the bigger your fleet grows.
If their fleet's growing, Miami's coming online. There's 650 vehicles in the fleet. By the end of next year, I'd be very comfortable telling you it's over 1,000. When you bring Austin, Atlanta, Miami, you could even push 1,200. And you think about it, it'd be really interesting the technical improvements that building the LiDAR in-house is going to get you. And if you're going to stay in LiDAR, do you have to build an in-house LiDAR program to make it truly succeed to get the benefits of it? And I asked that with Aurora's now expanding the 70,000 square foot facility in Montana for their first light LiDAR that they're building in-house. They're obviously doubling down on it. Mr. Urmson was out there with the governor of Montana. Does that become, if you're going to stay with LiDAR, it has to become an in-house program, cost aside, if that's the path you're going to go? Because what you're going to unlock from a features perspective, from a performance perspective?
I'm trying to think if we hold up Waymo as the most successful robotaxi company, it's too early to hold up any trucking company as the most successful trucking company because they're all pre-launch at this point. We can certainly argue that Aurora's one of three that are the leading companies. Clearly they see the value in going in-house and not liking what's off the shelf. So I think the answer has to be, for reasons that we should probably ask Chris Urmson and Dmitry Dologov about, what are the advantages of going in-house that you cannot get with off-the-shelf LiDAR.
And if Dmitry and Chris come out and lay out a very clear roadmap of what those advantages are, does the LiDAR market even succeed to be a market, or does it cease? We're seeing Alan Prescott's out at Luminar. Luminar's having a lot of trouble. I was looking at the stock numbers. I was actually shocked that Ouster is doing well, but I'm hearing from engineers that the LiDARs over 25 miles an hour don't very, very well. And then if you speak to engineers, you have Hesai. So does the market just kind of consolidate around Hesai, the DoD stuff aside?
This is more interesting because I feel like with a driver assistance system where you're seeing, that Luminar tried to forge that market and others following. I think that's where, to back to what you were originally talking about, where the idea of a camera only or camera centric approach probably you can get away with in a safe way. Like, I guess what's your definition of how safe do you need to be? Because I think no matter what, adding LiDAR improves and enhances safety. But if you run with the idea that you have a human in the loop, perhaps a human who's responsible for the driving, then maybe you don't need LiDAR at that point.
The future is not going to be human in the loop. It's too dangerous. Humans get distracted. Humans have emotions. We both have kids. Watch Inside Out. Those little characters up here, they do all sorts of wacky, kooky things. We can't have a human in the loop, let's be honest, long term.
I mean, that's probably for the rest of our lifetime, I think, Grayson, and you're younger than I am, but I think that there's a human in the loop for the majority of vehicle miles traveled for the rest of my lifetime. How's that for a...
It's an honest answer. It's the true answer. It's an honest answer and it's a true answer. But I don't want to have a human in the loop. I don't understand why I have to drive anywhere. I took my Tesla out the other day. I was off-roading, going into a grass parking lot and parked fine, in and out, no problem. I don't want to have a steering wheel. My wife's like, well, I want a steering wheel because if I take manual control, I don't want a steering wheel. I want to take a nap. I want to watch a Netflix movie. I want to Netflix and chill in my car. I don't want to pay attention.
Of course. And that's, it's interesting. I've heard that, so we're a couple of weeks away from CES right now. I've heard that we're going to see a lot of level 3 innovation, a lot of level 3 systems at CES. And I remain highly skeptical that that's ever going to be a thing for the exact reason that you just said. If I'm not responsible, I want to read a book, I want to fall asleep, I want to watch Netflix. I don't want to actually be responsible for being the backup at a moment's notice. That's level 3 today. And what we really want is that magic moment where not just where I can take my hands off the steering wheel, but where I can take my attention off the road. And those two things are often equated, and they are very much not the same thing.
No, you need to remove the liability. You need to remove the steering wheel. L3 has been said for decades now is the most dangerous level. And I agree with that. You talk to the engineers, you get complacent, you're not paying, your hands off, eyes off. If you want to use that term, you're not paying attention. Also, I think it's and you got to take control. Crash happens. So you look at this, CES leading up to L3 systems. Well, who's at CES? Additional OEMs outside of Ford and GM, mostly. Why? I think investing in L3 is a mistake because it is going to let's get Sergey on here from Coop. Ask him about all the liability, the best insurance guy out there for autonomy. Ask him about all the liability issues with L3. He can go on for days about all those liability issues. Who's going to own that liability? So let's say if it's a Conti design system, if it's a Magna design system, if it's somebody's building something on top of the Snapdragon digital chassis, or somebody building something on top of Mobileye, where's the liability going to live? That's something that's going to have to be figured out there.
Well, to go back to and another wrinkle on top of that is we're not just talking about product liability. Phil Koopman from Carnegie Mellon has said often it's also criminal liability, and vehicle manufacturers and suppliers cannot decide what you might be criminally liable for. That's something that the courts are ultimately going to decide, and there's going to be a case where someone's going to be arrested for a crash and say, hey, my car was responsible, it was level 3, and then this whole thing is going to be litigated. But if you're a human driver, I don't want to be the guinea pig for that court case. So I would much prefer a system that I know I am always responsible, a very sophisticated level 2 system, or I am never involved in the driving loop. When you mix those things together, it spells trouble.
It spells trouble, but we know what doesn't smell trouble is L4. What Waymo has done with L4 is nothing short of miraculous. It's magnificent. Years ago, they would say, oh, Waymo can't do it. Waymo can't do it. Waymo did it. Waymo scaling. They're the clear leader in the robotaxi business. We're going to see what's going to happen when Tesla introduces the Cybercab. We're going to see what happens when Zoox scales, and I'm very curious to see, is it going to be single rider? Is it going to be mandatory shared? Those are all questions that are going to be asked. We're going to get Sergey on here, Pete. We're going to have him on here with the three of us, and we're going to have a whole thing on L3, because that's what we do. And we ask these questions, and we have these really great conversations, and we're having you on again post CES. We're going to do one with you and me just because it's fun. And then we're going to do one with Sergey, and we're going to ask him all about level 3. Sergey, this is your official invitation on the record, sir. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is investing in autonomy. Pete, as always, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy. And for our listeners and viewers, tune into the Shift podcast. Pete crushes it every single week.
Thank you, Grayson. I hope you're right on that. But I'm really happy to join you today, as always, and look forward to the next one down the road.